Are we about to kill e-bikes with excessive regulation, or is there a better way forward? So a pretty bad law just passed in New Jersey that some people are saying that it threatens the very future of e-bikes in the state. And even if you don't live in New Jersey, you might want to pay attention to this, because I fear that if those of us who love bikes don't get in front of this, then something bad is going to happen that causes a knee-jerk response from ill-informed politicians, and these bad laws are just going to keep coming. So I spent some time looking at e-bike regulations around the world, trying to find a better way forward for all of us. And I'll go through the pros and cons of each of them. And I'm lucky enough that David Shelnut, the biking lawyer himself, agreed to go through these with me. Okay, if you don't know what I'm talking about, here's a quick recap of where we are. E-bikes and other micro-mobility devices have exploded in popularity over the last decade, but in many places, the regulations governing these vehicles have not kept up. In some places, the law doesn't even define basic questions like, is this an e-bike? Is this? Is this? Should e-bikes have speed limits? Should they have rules around maximum power? Should kids be allowed to ride them? And even in places where there are rules, the rules are confused or misunderstood or rarely enforced. Like, if this is an e-bike, should it be allowed on this bike lane? What about this bike on this path? So this lack of rules has caused problems. There have been some horrible incidents of kids being killed riding things that look like e-bikes, which has prompted some politicians in New Jersey to bring in some rules that require people to get license and registration to ride some e-bikes, which seems crazy because most people on e-bikes look like this and don't pose any risk at all. If you want more details on this law, check out the great videos that Seth over at Burn Peak has done. Okay, you catch that? But just a couple caveats up front. I'm approaching this from the perspective that e-bikes are amazing and they need to be in our cities. I acknowledge that broadly speaking, the fact that we're talking about these kind of regulations on e-bikes is insane. Yes, of course, e-bikes have some risk and we want to make sure everybody is safe, but our transportation system is absurdly expensive. It's responsible for horrific costs on society and humanity. We're completely complacent in the face of the carnage of our transportation system. And almost none of this is because of e-bikes. It's because of cars and trucks. And yet here we are. And there may be some solutions that I've missed. I'm mostly hoping to spark a conversation here. So I'd love to hear your thoughts. Okay, here are the options in front of us as far as I can tell. Number one, the three-tiered classification system that currently exists in most of the US. Number two, banning throttles. Number three, hardware restrictions. Number four, geofencing and speed control. Number five, regulating behavior. Number six, insurance and registration. Number seven, infrastructure and speed separation. And number eight, do nothing. Okay, let's get started. Number one, the classification system. So most US states operate under a system that classifies e-bikes in three different ways with different rules for each class. Generally, this is how it goes. Class 1, pedal assist bikes only, where the motor cuts off at 20 miles per hour. Class 2, electric bikes that feature a throttle that can propel the bike without pedaling, also capped at 20 miles per hour. Class 3, pedal assist only with a higher speed cap of 28 miles per hour. Now, there are some variations from state to state, but generally Class 3 bikes are only allowed on roads, not on bike routes. And some states also allow those bikes to have throttles. And anything that does not fall into one of these three categories, it's not an e-bike, it's a motorcycle. Or as they're starting to become called, e-motos. And they're subject to the same rules as motorcycles, including requiring licenses and registrations, brake lights, and the whole works like that. The pros and cons of each. Now, this classification system looks great on paper, and I'd say it does work really well in lots of places. The downside is that it's kind of confusing and it can be hard to enforce. It can be difficult, if not impossible, to tell the difference between the different classes of bikes without a really close examination of the bike. And in most places, local cops don't even know how to tell the difference, so it's become an enforcement problem. Here's what I mean. Like, a bike can have pedals and a pedal assist motor that looks just like a bike, but it may have a throttle, and that throttle helps push it beyond the 28 mile per hour limit. That classifies it as an e-motorcycle or an e-moto. But if a cop sees this and approaches it, it looks like a bike, and really the only way to tell if it's outside of their classification system is if they somehow clock it to see that it can go faster than that 28 mile per hour limit. So there is a sense that as good as this classification system looks on paper, maybe it's not really working in the real world. So I contacted People for Bikes, the advocacy organization that came up with this idea and really pushed it in lots of US states. They didn't want to comment right now, but they said come back to them in the future. Let's see what David Shelnut has to say about this.
I think that is the model that we would like to see in Ontario. Like, we want to see people using e-bikes that go max 30K, not 75. And that completely changes the ball game in terms of what kind of vehicle you're operating. So no, we do want to see that, but it's got to be coupled with public education and the other thing I said, which is like flooding the market with vehicles that can't be categorized or shouldn't be categorized or on our roadways. That's a huge thing we got to deal with. You can buy a stand-up electric unicycle that'll go like 60 kilometers an hour. You can buy that, get shipped to your house in Ontario, and that is not a classified bicycle or e-bike, and really perhaps shouldn't be on our roadway without some insurance or something like that. So I think it's got to be public education dovetailed with like what is being sold to people.
Number 2, banning throttles or the pedelec system. Let's call this the European model because a lot of countries in Europe currently use this. And the simplest way to break it down is probably like this. If it has a throttle, meaning it has a button or a trigger that accelerates the bike independent of the pedals, it's a motor vehicle. If it has a pedal assist motor only, the thing that Europeans call a pedelec, it's a pedal assist electric bike. Then it's an electric bike. The good thing about this system, of course, is that it's much simpler. I mean, there are still rules for pedelecs. In most places, they can't have motors with more than 250 watts of power, and they can't go more than 25 kilometers per hour or 15 miles per hour. But it is a much simpler and cleaner system, but it's not perfect. For one thing, again, it can be tough to define how fast a machine is capable of going without some kind of mechanical test or a speed test. I'd also say that banning throttles limits the potential of pedelecs. I hear from people all the time who have maybe mobility problems, or maybe they just have a really heavy e-bike, or maybe they're riding a cargo bike, and that throttle just takes the edge off a little bit, makes it a little bit easier to get going, or that throttle gives them just a little bit of reassurance that if they get a little far from home and their legs can't get them home, that throttle is there to back them up. So that system would certainly limit the potential of a lot of people who've come to rely on throttles in their e-biking.
We've got to think about this from the lens of multiple different device users. Someone who's 78 or 80 on a pedelec, what's the difference if they have a throttle and it only goes to 28 versus someone that has a pedelec that goes to 28? As long as the weights and stuff are categorizations are similar. I think like throttle, pedelec, that kind of differential is not what we want to separate. It's the speed, it's the weight of the bike, the power of the motor, and that kind of thing.
Number 3, hardware restrictions. The basic idea here is that we put rules for manufacturers to follow in the creation of e-bikes, like putting speed limiters that make it impossible for the bike to go past the speed limit, or regulating the maximum power of e-bike motors. In fact, these restrictions already exist in a lot of places, and I'd say even the pedelec restrictions in Europe are a form of hardware restriction as well. It can certainly work, but it can be tough in our interconnected world to get this done. For one thing, the rules are different everywhere, so it can be really tough for a manufacturer of e-bikes to ship bikes all over the world and be reassured that the bike is hitting the destination that complies with the law. And I'd say in some cases, it's even been a bit of a wink, wink, nudge, nudge with consumers that, hey, we're complying with the law, but with a simple screwdriver, you can probably make the bike go as fast as you want.
I like to think we control what can be sold and operated on the streets in our country. I'd like us to try. I don't think we have tried at all. That example of the city of Toronto is a perfect one. Like from North York to Canadian Tire at Bloor and Yonge, you buy an e-scooter that's illegal in Toronto. Not one person from the city has gone into those stores and said, "Hey, you can't do this here." Let's try that first before we sort of write the whole thing off.
Number 4, geofencing and speed control. This is closely related to hardware restrictions, but I'd say this is more like a software restriction. This is basically a technological regulatory option that uses GPS to draw lines on a map over a city that restricts the speed of the bike in certain areas. You may have already encountered this if you've ridden like a bike share, pedelec, or a scooter. This also has its limits though. In China, for example, the government recently started encouraging e-bike manufacturers to include this kind of GPS technology on all models, and it's a requirement now for commercial bikes that are used in bike share systems or fleets. The problem here, of course, is privacy. I think a lot of people will get creeped out knowing their e-bike is monitoring their every move no matter where they are in the city.
I support it. I think that if the speed limit is this, it cannot go faster. And if there's limiters to do it, great. I can tell you that in Ontario, if your bike is capable of going more than 32 kilometers an hour and you're hit by a car, you won't be able to sue the car for personal injury because the speed is the key indicator that makes it a e-bike or a motor vehicle. And in that case, those companies that sell that illegal bike, I'm suing because I can't sue the motor vehicle. I am directly going to sue those companies for selling, especially if there's a wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Like that'd be blood in the water for us, I think.
Number 5, regulating behavior. So this is the general approach that's taken here in Canada, where I live. We don't have the same classification system as the US, and we have some general rules that limit the maximum power of e-bikes, and we have restrictions on taking those certain bikes onto bike routes and that kind of thing. But really what we're regulating is behavior. So this includes age limits and speed limits. So we have speed limits on our pathways and our bike lanes. And if you exceed those speed limits, you're going to be fined. The good part about this is that everybody understands it because it mimics the same way we enforce rules on roads with car and truck drivers. Sure, you could drive some monstrously overpowered truck, but you've got to drive within the rules of the road or else you'll face the consequences. This also sounds good on paper, but we see the way this works with cars, right? This has mostly become a question of enforcement. Enforcing these rules on pathways and bike lanes just hasn't really been a priority for a lot of police forces. And even when like speed traps are set up, they get a ton of pushback from cyclists who freak out about it because they think it's stupid to spend police resources targeting bikes, which are a very tiny problem, and not on cars, which are a huge, massive problem. So yes, as a cyclist, I'm here to say cyclists are often the ones pushing back against this. But without that enforcement, we are starting to see conflict on our pathways and calls for somebody to do something to stop really fast-moving, heavy e-bikes from blowing down pathways by pedestrians or by slower-moving cyclists. This is what I fear will push us into bad knee-jerk laws like what's happened in New Jersey.
So that's an interesting question in Ontario because we're kind of having a regression there. We were enforcing speed limits with cameras in Ontario, and the Premier has yanked those and sort of co-signed speeding and dangerous driving in Ontario. So, I mean, I think we're a long way away from figuring out how to manage speed.
Number 6, insurance and registration. You sometimes hear people, and I would say this is mostly non-bike people, say that we just need to require e-bike riders to have license and registration in the same way that we do for cars. I mean, this is a system that people already use and understand for their cars, so that's one thing. But overall, I'd say this is a pretty weak argument for bikes. For one thing, to set up and manage a system like this is a huge amount of cost and red tape, both to the governments to set it up and for individuals to comply with it. And that in itself would be hugely discouraging for people to ride their e-bikes. Like, is grandma really going to go through the hassle of getting a license and registration just to ride her secondhand $600 pedal assist for a few Sundays in the summertime? It seems like overkill. Also, insurance is a requirement for cars because of the huge costs that driving them inflicts on society, both in property damage and in human suffering. And we just don't see bikes causing that much damage.
So I don't think it's feasible to license all e-bike riders. I don't think we should. I think licensing and insuring everybody who hops on an e-bike or pedal assist or throttle assist bike will necessarily reduce the amount of people who use those devices. And I think that's a bigger problem than the downsides. The next problem will be who's going to insure this stuff, because none of the big players are doing that.
7, infrastructure and speed separation. This is another option that argues that the problem we're seeing is not with the individual users, but it's the system the users are functioning within. And in this case, that system are the cities we live in. Maybe the problem is that our road network has not been set up to accommodate the changes that e-bikes have brought about. Yes, we're talking here about bike lanes. Maybe we need to expand the road network to accommodate users of different speeds and of different kinds of machines. What would this look like? Well, maybe it's lanes for cars and trucks, lanes for e-motos, motorcycles, and mopeds, and then lanes for pedelecs or regular bike users. This would be great because it would offer the absolute most choice to users. You could just pick up the mode that makes the most sense for your trip and use it. Some cities in China, which have gone through a huge transformation change in recent years, 40 years ago it was mostly bicycles, then a huge switch over to automobiles, and then they've realized that that system doesn't work in a big city, and so now they're trying to go back to e-bikes and bicycles. They're actually developing in some places different lanes of different speeds for different types of bike users. The downside of this, of course, is feasibility and the pace of change. Like here in North America, we can barely get bike lanes built because car drivers feel entitled to all of the road space, and it takes forever to get any change done. So are we going to add like another user to this system? It would be great, but we're having trouble even getting out of the starting blocks on this one.
You're going in the bike lane, and someone on what's basically an electric moped blasts past you at 40 kilometers an hour, and the width of that bike lane is like really small. Like someone sneezed the wrong way, your handlebars clip and you're both down. I think a lot of public education can be helpful. In the urban centers, a lot of people riding these devices are working cyclists. We have a direct line to them through the companies that make millions of dollars putting them on our streets. We can make those companies implement all sorts of safety programming.
Number 8 is just do nothing. The last option that I see us having is to just maintain the status quo. This means a patchwork of different rules in different countries and even jurisdictions and even different cities within the same jurisdiction. I mean, this isn't a horrible idea. In a lot of places, the status quo is working just fine. But I fear this is not a viable long-term solution. Our transportation system is in the middle of a huge transition, and I would throw into this even more of a push for public transit. Things are changing and our cities have not kept up. We can try to maintain the status quo, but it does feel to me like we're just putting our head in the sand and it's just a matter of time before demand for these new systems and we really bump up to the limits of the existing system will force change of some kind. So we either get on that change proactively now or we scramble to deal with it when a crisis emerges.
Like, you drive your car through a daycare and not get your car confiscated, you know? Like, it's just this we're doing really nuts stuff, knee-jerk wise, when all we need is a bit of leadership.
So these are the options as far as I can see. And yes, they are imperfect. None of these is without a problem. And that's what makes this so difficult. In looking at these, I also see the bigger problem here isn't just the rules, it's enforcement of those rules. I mean, a lot of these options seem perfectly viable to me on paper, but if they're not being enforced, they're not going to work. And up until now, most places just haven't made a priority out of this. So what do you think? I really wanted this video to move beyond just complaining about the problem and starting to think more about solutions. So I'd love to hear what you think. Share your comments, click on that link to fill out the survey. We'll see what kind of results we get back, and maybe I'll come back and share what you guys think in a future video. Until then, a big thanks to David for sharing his thoughts, and thanks to all of you for taking some time to think about this issue.